The sun was sinking low over the endless plains, painting the land in shades of burning gold and dusty red, when Caleb Hartman noticed the figure near his fence. He had lived alone on this stretch of land for nearly 12 years, long enough to know the difference between a wandering animal and a human too tired to hide. His barn stood weathered and silent behind him, its wooden bones creaking in the evening wind, and his horses shifted nervously, as if they sensed something old and dangerous in the air. Caleb rested one hand on the fence post, his other brushing the worn grip of the revolver at his side, not out of fear, but habit. Out here, habits kept men alive. The figure was native, that much was clear even from a distance, thin as a shadow, moving slowly. Like every step demanded more strength than the last. Caleb's jaw tightened. He had seen men like this before, after raids, after forced marches, after hunger had eaten them from the inside out. Most folks in town would have turned away, locked their doors, and prayed the problem would disappear. Caleb didn't move. He watched, he waited. When the stranger finally reached the fence, he collapsed to his knees, fingers clawing at the dry earth as if the ground itself might offer mercy. His face was hollow, eyes sunken deep, lips cracked and bleeding. He wore torn buckskin stained with dust and old blood, and his hair hung loose, tangled by weeks, maybe months of hardship. Caleb stepped forward slowly, boots crunching against the dirt. "Easy now," he said, his voice low and steady. The native man lifted his head just enough to meet Caleb's eyes. There was no threat there, only hunger, only pain, only the kind of exhaustion that strips a man down to his soul. Caleb had seen that look once before in his own reflection, years ago, when the war took everything but his breath. Without another word, Caleb unlatched the gate and knelt beside the man. He offered his canteen first. The stranger hesitated, pride flickering weakly behind his eyes, then drank, slow at first, then desperately. Water spilled down his chin as his hands trembled. Caleb didn't rush him. "There's food," he said quietly. "You can eat. You're safe here." The word safe seemed to hit something deep. The native man closed his eyes, a low, broken sound escaping his chest, not quite a sob, not quite a breath. Caleb helped him to his feet, half carrying him toward the barn, where the smell of hay and horses mixed with the warmth of the fading day. Inside, Caleb sat him down on a crate and brought out bread, dried meat, and a bowl of stew he'd kept warm by the fire. The stranger ate like a man pulled back from the edge of death, each bite careful, respectful, as if he feared the food might vanish if he took too much. Caleb watched in silence, studying the symbols faintly etched into the man's necklace. He recognized them. Not well, but enough. This man belonged to a tribe that did not forgive debts lightly, kindness included. After a long... "Well," the stranger spoke, his voice rough but controlled. "You should not have helped me." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Funny," he replied. "Most starving men say thank you." The native man met his gaze. "My people will come." The wind rattled. The barn doors, as if the land itself had heard those words. Caleb didn't laugh. He didn't scoff. He simply nodded. "Then they'll know where you were treated like a man." Night fell heavy and quiet. Caleb gave the stranger a blanket and a place near the fire. Outside, coyotes howled in the distance, and the plains stretched wide and watchful beneath the stars. Caleb sat on his porch long after the fire died down, rifle across his knees, eyes fixed on the horizon. Something told him this act, this single moment of mercy, had shifted the world. And the world, once moved, never returned things gently. At dawn the sound came, hooves, not a few. Not dozens, hundreds. The ground itself trembled. Caleb stepped outside slowly, heart steady, breath calm. Across the open field, lining up with terrifying precision, were 200 native warriors on horseback, silent as stone, faces unreadable, weapons gleaming in the rising sun. At their center rode a leader tall and proud, his gaze locked on Caleb's barn. The stranger from the night before stepped beside Caleb now, standing straight, strength returned, eyes burning with purpose. "You fed a dying man," he said. "Now you face a nation." Caleb adjusted his hat, the morning light casting long shadows behind him. He didn't reach for his gun. He didn't step back. He took one step forward, and that was when the real story began. The horses stood motionless, 200 of them breathing as one, their breath rising in faint clouds as the cold morning air clung to the plains. Caleb could hear the leather creak, the soft clink of beads and metal, the low snorts of animals trained for war. The warriors did not shout. They did not threaten. That silence was heavier than gunfire. Silence meant control. Silence meant confidence. Caleb felt it settle in his chest, not as fear, but as weight, the kind a man accepts when he knows running won't save him. He kept his hands open at his sides, palms visible, posture relaxed but unbroken. Behind him, the barn stood like a final line between past and future. Its doors closed, its shadows deep. The leader at the center lifted one hand slowly, and the entire formation stopped breathing. The native man beside Caleb stepped forward then, his voice carrying across the field, steady and strong, nothing like the broken whisper of the night before. He spoke in his own language first, words flowing like a river cut deep by history. The warriors listened without moving. Caleb understood none of it, yet somehow understood all of it. This was not a demand. It was a truth being laid bare. When the man finished, the leader dismounted and walked forward alone, boots sinking into the dust with deliberate steps. He was older than Caleb, his face marked by years of sun and war, his eyes sharp enough to peel a man open without a blade. "You fed my brother," the leader said in English, his voice calm but carrying the weight of command. Caleb nodded once. He was starving. The leader studied him carefully. Many men would have let him die. Caleb shrugged. "Many men aren't worth remembering." Murmur passed through the warriors like wind through tall grass. Not approval. Not anger, recognition. The leader stopped a few feet away, close enough that Caleb could see the scars beneath the paint, the lines carved by grief and responsibility. "Do you know what you invited into your life?" the leader asked. Caleb didn't hesitate. "I invited a hungry man to eat." The leader's eyes narrowed, then just for a heartbeat softened. "You invited a debt," he said. "And among my people, debts are not small." The brother turned to Caleb then, his voice lower, meant only for him. "They thought I was dead," he said. "I was taken weeks ago, left behind when I could no longer walk." Caleb felt something tighten in his chest. "You didn't deserve that." The brother shook his head. "Deserve has nothing to do with survival." He paused. "But mercy does." The leader raised his hand again, and two warriors rode forward carrying bundles. They dismounted and placed them gently on the ground. Furs, food, silver, finely worked tools, wealth enough to change a man's life. The leader spoke again. "This is payment." Caleb looked at the offerings, then back at the line of warriors. "I didn't help him for payment." The leader nodded slowly. "Then this is not payment." He stepped closer. "This is proof." Caleb frowned. "Proof of what?" The leader's voice dropped. "Proof that when others come, men who do not care about mercy, men who only take, my people will stand where you stand." The words settled deep, heavy and dangerous. Caleb understood now. Helping one man had placed him under the shadow of an entire nation. Protection and consequence woven together. Before Caleb could respond, a distant sound rolled across the plains. Another set of hooves, faster, fewer. A scout galloped in hard from the east, dust flying, urgency carved into every movement. He spoke quickly to the leader, eyes flashing toward the horizon. The leader's expression hardened. He turned back to Caleb. "They are coming," he said. "The ones who drove my brother to the dirt? The ones who burn barns and call it progress." Caleb felt his pulse quicken, not with fear, but clarity. He had known this land wouldn't let him live quietly forever. He looked back at his barn, at the life he'd built plank by plank, scar by scar. Then he looked at the warriors lined up in absolute order, waiting not for commands but for meaning. Then Caleb said calmly, "They'll have to come through me." The leader studied him for a long moment. Then he smiled, not kindly, not cruelly, but with respect. He raised his arm high. 200 warriors turned their horses in unison, positioning themselves along the edges of the land, forming a living wall around the barn. Dust rose like a warning to the sky. The brother placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder. "From this moment," he said quietly, "you're not alone." Caleb nodded, eyes fixed on the distant horizon where trouble was already moving. He didn't know how many would come. He didn't know how many would fall, but he knew this. One act of kindness had turned a lonely barn into a line no enemy could cross easily, and the sun climbed higher, watching it all. The first gunshot cracked the air long before the riders came into full view. It echoed across the plains like a warning the land itself didn't want to give. Caleb didn't flinch. He had heard that sound in other places, other years, when men thought noise could replace courage. The native warriors shifted subtly, hands steady on reins, eyes forward, bodies ready without panic. They were not here for show. They were here because they had chosen to be. Caleb stepped down from the porch and walked forward until he stood between the barn and the wide open field, making himself visible. If the men coming wanted a target, he would be the first thing they saw. The riders crested the low ridge in a cloud of dust, 15 at first, then more behind them, white men, armed, faces hard and hollowed by greed and violence. They rode like men who had never been told no, men who believed land was something you took if you could hold it long enough. Their leader wore a black coat despite the heat, his rifle slung casually across his chest. He smiled when he saw Caleb standing alone. "Well, I'll be damned," the man called out. Looks like the old ghost finally decided to show himself. Caleb recognized him instantly. His name burned in memory like a scar that never healed. Mercer, a man who had survived too many crimes by being faster to shoot than to think. Caleb felt the past claw at him, the fire, the screams, the bodies left behind when Mercer's men raided a settlement near the river years ago. That was the day Caleb stopped being a soldier and started being a man who walked away. Mercer dismounted and stepped closer, boots kicking up dust. "Heard you were hiding out here," Mercer said. "Figured you'd be easy pickings." Before Caleb could answer, the leader of the native warriors rode forward just enough to be seen. One by one, the warriors revealed themselves, spreading outward, silent and unstoppable. Mercer's smile faltered. His men shifted uneasily, hands tightening on rifles. "Now that's a sight," Mercer muttered. "Didn't know you'd made friends." Caleb's voice was calm, iron underneath. "They're not friends," he said. "They're family." The brother stepped forward, eyes locked on Mercer. "You left me to die," he said in English, each word precise. Mercer squinted, recognition dawning too late. "You should have stayed dead," he snapped, raising his rifle slightly. That was all it took. The leader of the warriors lifted his hand and held it there. No one moved. Power rested in the pause. Caleb understood then. Violence was coming, but not yet. Not until the truth had its say. Mercer laughed nervously. "You think this scares me?" he shouted. "I've killed more men than you can count." Caleb took another step forward. "That's the difference between us," he said. "I remember everyone." The words landed harder than any bullet. Mercer's jaw tightened. He saw it now, the resolve, the lack of fear, the army he hadn't planned for. He also saw the barn, the land, the opportunity. Greed outweighed sense. It always did. Mercer raised his rifle. The shot never came. An arrow struck the ground inches from Mercer's boot, embedding itself deep in the dirt with a sound like a judge's gavel. Mercer froze. The leader spoke, his voice carrying across the field. "Leave," he said simply. "And live." For a moment it seemed Mercer might listen. Then pride twisted his face. He fired. What followed was not chaos. It was precision. 200 warriors moved as one, horses surging forward, arrows darkening the sky. Gunfire erupted, but it was swallowed by speed and discipline. Caleb moved instinctively, rifle up, firing only when necessary. Every shot deliberate. He wasn't fighting for land. He was fighting for the choice he'd made at the fence. The brother fought beside him now, no longer weak, his movements sharp and certain. The barn stood behind them, untouched, as if the land itself refused to let it fall. Within minutes it was over. The surviving attackers fled, dragging their wounded, fear finally teaching them what mercy had tried to. Mercer lay in the dirt, wounded but alive, staring up at Caleb in disbelief. "You could have let me die," Mercer rasped. Caleb looked down at him, then at the warriors, then back at the man who had once defined his nightmares. "That's the difference between us," Caleb said quietly. He turned away. As the dust settled, the leader approached Caleb and extended his hand. Not in command, not in obligation, but in respect. "Your barn stands," he said. "So does your word." Caleb shook his hand, feeling the weight of something older than law pass between them. The brother smiled faintly. "You saved one life," he said. "Today you saved many." The warriors began to withdraw, returning to the horizon from which they came, leaving the land quiet once more. But it was a different quiet now, earned, not empty. Caleb stood alone again as the sun dipped toward evening, the barn still standing, the plain still wide. He knew this was not the end. It was the beginning of a legacy born from hunger, mercy, and a line drawn in the dust. If this chapter moved you, if you believe one good choice can change everything, subscribe now. The next chapter reveals what happens after the warriors leave, and the cost of carrying a debt this powerful.